Hello, this is Mark Tucker with a new APL Components video for viewers of the Dabble Lab channel. In this video, we'll learn about the pager component. If you want to follow along in APL Ninja, look for the project link in the description. Here we go. Today we're going to talk about the pager control, and then to do that we have a comic called Pepper and Carrot, which is Creative Commons licensed. So we can use it in this project. Notice we have the page, which is has an image associated with the comic, the title page in this case, and we have a navbar. Notice that we can swipe and we can go to different pages. Notice this box down here in the bottom corner. It's representing the text that's on the screen here and could be used for text-to-speech. If we navigate to the next one, notice that there's a transition. Notice if we go, we can start to see the next page. If we don't quite make it all the way to our transition, it snaps back. If we go more than halfway, it's going to complete that, but it's going to go page by page. We also have the ability to use this nav control. So we can do the next page or the previous page. Notice how the page number changes as we do that, but notice the smooth transitions as we go from page to page. Now the last and the first are going to function a little bit differently. Notice that when we click that, it's just going to show immediately. There isn't going to be a nice transition. So that just takes us right to the last page. We've got some title and an image here and some text. If we go to the first one, it snaps right to the first one. But doing that, we still get this SpeakItem event happening. This command executes and the text would be played if we were on a device. So let's take a look at this a little bit more in detail. This data is coming from, like we do a lot of times, the data sources. Here's a screen root object here, and we've got a type property. We have a properties property, and then we have this transformers. Now we've put data here before, and we haven't really had to have to follow any specific structure, but this one seems to be more rigid. We've got this thing called transformers, which we're going to need to convert the text from the screen, or the text from each item to speech, which could be used in SpeakItem. So we have to figure out a little bit what's going on with that. If we go to APL data sources, all the times before we've been having to work with just freeform JSON. So we could do whatever we wanted to in this case. But here, if we're going to use transformers, we need to use an object data source. So here's some additional information about that. But there's a certain structure, like we saw in the example. There was a type property, there was a properties property that we had to do, and then this transformers. So there's this a structure that we have to follow in order to use transformers that we wouldn't have to normally. But if you notice, when we open up the properties, then this is freeform. We can do whatever we want to under properties, and in this case we have a single property called pages, and for each page we have information that describes each page. So like in this case, here's the title page. It has an ID of title. Here's the image, which is showing up here. We've got a scale property, which is saying that show this image as best fit as opposed to best fill, and we covered that when we were talking about the image component. And then here's the speech. So this is the text that we want spoken, but APL can't do that directly. It has to convert that text into speech so that it can be spoken. So we'll look at that when we get to that part. But notice here that each of the different pages has a unique ID, an image associated with it. And as we go through, these are pretty much the same. We get to this second to last page here, this one in this case, and notice that instead of best fill, it's best fit, because this is a portrait page that we want to show the whole thing. If we cropped it like we did the other ones, then we'd be missing part of it. So we don't want to do that. But we can specify a background color to show along with that. And then this last page is different too. It's our credits page, And besides an image, we also have text here, and we're just saying that we've created this property called isHalf, saying, do you want the screen to be split in half, part to show the image and part to show the text. So that's how the data is represented. And so let's go ahead and we'll talk about from the top down some of the tricks that we did here. Like on this page, we have an image and we have the text, and we want a white background with black text. Well, if we hard code the theme for this page to be light, then that's exactly what it does. If it was theme was set to dark, then it would be black background with white text. So we took advantage of the theme to get the right background color that we need. We have some styles that we're importing in, and we've defined this nav text color, this green for these buttons down here as a specific color. Notice that when the button is disabled, it's a lighter shade of that green, or has some opacity really to it. So that happens from a style. So we've created a new style called nav text, and each of these buttons are using that nav text style. And this is something new. We've extended nav text from a style called text style body, and that is a predefined style that Amazon gives us and is part of this Alexa styles import that we're doing here. So it says take everything that's associated with this text style body style and override or add, if it doesn't or have it, a color property set to this same thing as this resource that we created. And when the state.disabled, this is a special data binding expression. When the state of this button is disabled, then I want to set the color of it to that same color, but with 30% opacity. So that's how we can, with one style saying this is nav text, take advantage just by setting the disabled property true or false on the button to set this to a disabled button or not. So let's go down to our main template. Notice we have this component called navbar, which is this bottom part here, and that's going to come into play here. But before we get to that, let's look at our main template. We have this payload parameter, and that relates to the data that's in our data sources here. So if you notice, we have payload.screen.properties.pages. That's going to come in here to this screen.property.pages here. And so just like with our other components that are multi-child components, like the container or the sequence or the grid sequence, then we follow the same pattern. We take the multi-child parent control and set the data property to an array of items, in this case pages, and then this items property is going to be a template that for every item in our pages, in this case our pages array, it's going to render the controls or the components that make up this child multiple times, once for each data item that is in this array. So we'll look at that in a little bit more detail. But let's take a look at some of the properties on the pager control. So here in the pager, it's talking about it being different than the sequence control. If you remember last time when we talked about the sequence, as we moved from, kind of scrolled from page to page, it would just kind of scroll and you could have part of one page and part of the other, whereas with a pager, it has to show a complete page. So we'll either snap back to the current page or go on to the next page, depending on how much you've manually moved it. So the properties on this, let's go ahead and talk about those. This handle page move is a little bit more of an advanced property, but it's used for transitions. If you wanted to have fades as you were going from page to page, as opposed to the straight kind of swipe in and out that we currently have, then this is a place where you could do that. By default, the initial page is set to 0, which is the first page, and you could set it to something different. Navigation is a property that controls how the swiping of the control works. Right now we've got it set to normal, which means as you swipe, it goes to the next page. And when you get to the end, you can't swipe past the end, and you can swipe backwards and go back to the first, and you can't swipe past the first. So that's normal mode. If you set the navigation to none, that means that the swiping that we did, we couldn't do at all. We would have to use something like that navbar control that we have to change the pages, because we couldn't do it just by swiping. Wrap means when it comes to the end, when you're on the last one and you swipe, it wraps around to the beginning. Same thing with the beginning, it can wrap around to the end. Or you can choose to do forward only. You can't swipe backwards, you can only go forwards. We'll talk about this onPageChanged event, because this is where we're going to have to do something when the page changes. And that page change could happen either via the nav control or by the manual swiping. We've got the pages set to horizontal for the page direction, but you could have a vertical pager as well. So those are the main things that we want to cover in this. Let's go back over here, and because this all components have some properties that are base component properties that all components have. And one of those is this onMount. So the document itself has an onMount event that happens when the document is created. And when this pager component is created, then there's going to be an onMount when that pager component is created. So let's take a look about what commands we execute when this is first mounted. And we can take a look at this by just doing replay. Notice we're going to get a speak item here with the title of what this is. So that's what we're looking at, that when we first start, when this component is loaded, we're going to call a speak item with a component ID of title. Now, if we crack open this, we won't talk about it a lot, but if we look at this, notice that the component has a root container, which is for layout. It has an ID property that maps to data.item. And remember, data is a child property that you get for multi-child components. And so then for each of the pages, then we're going to get the item in the array dot the ID or the text speech. So this speech property is something that we need to set with the text that we want to speak out. And it's not the text that is in the data directly. We have to convert it, and that's why we have this transformer. But notice on our data that we have every page has an ID, title, episode, episode 1, page 1-1, page 1-2, page 2. So we have these different properties, and each of them has a speech property. And this could be labeled whatever we wanted to in this case. But what we're wanting is a text speech property. And you notice that doesn't exist on here. So that's what the transformer is going to do for us. What the transformer tells us is that go into this properties collection. The properties property is implied. So for every page in the properties, in pages under properties, find the speech property right here. And if it exists, then I want to use this text-to-speech transformer and create a new property on this item called text speech, which is now the speech item. This is the speakable thing that we can then assign to the speech property. And so then when we say down here, for example, in our mount, I want to speak whatever is in that speak property for the component that has the ID of title, then it speaks this first item, and that's why we get that one. So that's how that one works. Let's take a look at, so here's some more that talks about transformers. There's lots of different types of transformers. We're using the text-to-speech one. If you wanted to do SSML, you can do SSML to speech. If you wanted to do audio, you can't do the audio tag in SSML. You would have to use the APL audio to speech. And so these are more information that you can get on the different transformers. Let's also take a look here at the commands. So this is some more information about that SpeakItem command. There's a number of different properties. We're really only dealing with this component ID. So let's go back and take a look at what's happening next. Let's look at what's rendered on the page itself, and then we'll get into this navbar a little bit later. So if we look at this thing that's being repeated for each page that is a slide or a page on in our comic, then we've got a container that's taking up. Well, first of all, we have an outer container, which is our main template, which is taking up the whole screen. Then the pager control itself is also taking up the whole screen, and the container that is the child is taking up 100% of its parent, so it's taking up the whole screen as well. We've already talked about the ID and the speech, and so then we have a layout of a frame, which is taking up the whole space, and we're using that because we want to set the background color based on this background color property if it exists. Now, if the background property doesn't exist, it just assumes that it's transparent, and so that's why in these screens we get white background on the first and the last one. So that's how that color works, and a frame has a single child, and this is a container that's taking up the whole space, and we're aligning it at the start, and the only two things that we're showing is either an image or text. Well, all of the slides is showing just an image, except for the last one, which is showing an image and text. So if the data has an image property, then show an image, and we add some spacing, and we determine if the height's going to be 100% or 50% based on this is half property, and it's going to take up the whole width. So in this case, the image is going to take up the whole screen, and it's going to use the scale property that we have defined and the image property to set the scale and the source. So that's how we get the image. So we've got some place out here where we're storing all of our images for this. So it just uses this best fill or best fit to show the image. Now in the case of this last one, the height, the property is half is set to true, and it's not on any of the other ones, which defaults, then that's why this takes up 50% and this takes up 50%. And in this case, we're just showing the text. We're saying this is the text that we want to show, and whatnot. Now, so that's not really all that complicated. There's not really a lot to each page itself. In most cases, it's just an image and it's taking up the whole screen. But we've got this part where we need this text-speech property. And so that's where down here, it's going to go through and do that for us. For each of the speech properties, it's going to do a text-to-speech transformer, text-to-speech, and assign it to there. So we get the best of both worlds. We can swipe and we get the nice transitions, and we get the text-to-speech, and we can use the nav controls and do the same thing, and we're good. Everything's great on here. So let's take a look on this onPageChanged. So here, this event happens whenever you're either swiping to change a page or you're using a different command called SetPage. And that's what the buttons are doing. They're just saying, I want to set the page of our pager to one, relative 1, which means the next page, relative -1 value for the previous page, or we can set it to absolute to for the first page and absolute for the last page. So that's all we're doing with set page on the pager control. And so that's how we get the changing. So what happens when we do that, we want these two commands to run in parallel. So we have one command called the parallel command, which then has a commands property, which then we specify these two. So when we change these to a new page, then the onPageChanged happens, and we get an event. And in that event, we have a source.value, which is going to be a zero-based index. So we're saying, go into our data properties pages to the current page's data and grab the ID. And so now we speak item for the ID that we're currently on. And that's how we get the speak item when we change pages here. The other thing that we want to do is we want to keep our nav bar in sync. See this page number here, that as we change pages, that doesn't happen automatically. So what we want to do is we say, we've got a name for this nav bar, my nav bar in this case. We're going to set a property called current page. And since we're displaying this as a 1-based number as opposed to a 0-based index, we're taking the same value and adding 1, and then that, as we change pages here, then it updates the proper page number here. So that is how that part works. We're going to talk about the sequencer in a minute, so we won't forget that. All right, time to look at what this nav bar looks like. So this part down here is a frame, which is this background kind of this color. It's 000A, which is the same thing as 000000AA. But anyway, it's a background with some opacity to it, so that we can see it whether we're on a white screen or an image screen here. And it's taking up the whole width and just 100%, just 100 display independent pixels. And we can say that we want this to be aligned center, and the trick here is that we're positioning this absolutely. So it's going to appear, since the frame is defined after this main image here, it's going to display after it, and then it's going to go ahead and lay out our component. So we've created this child item. It's of type navbar. And it's saying that the pager component up here, we've named the pager. The ID for the pager is my pager. All right. We won't worry about that too much. This will go away. And thank you. All right. We got a lot going on. So what we want to do is we specified what the pager is, and we're setting the total pages. So we've got a counter, like a total pages property and a current pages property on the pager, and we're saying this is how many pages there are, and then we're defining what we want the buttons to look like and whether we want to show this page number or not. So if we go to the property up here, let's go ahead to this navbar component. So here's the navbar, and we've set some properties. Here's the current page, the total pages, the ID for the navbar, what the pager is that the navbar is going to be controlling, and the text for the buttons, and whether we're showing this. So we've defined kind of what our interface is for our component. It's got an outer container with an ID that takes up the whole space that we've defined outside of here as far as how big this is. We're laying this out in a row, and we're aligning items in the center, and we're going to justify content between. So that's why we get like things evenly spaced here because of that. So we've got for button number 1 a touch wrapper, that's taking up whatever the width of the text is, plus 100% of the height of this, this bar control here. And we're setting the text to, in this case, first button text. And we're setting this disabled property. Every component has a property for disabled, and we're saying when the current page equals 1, so when we're on the first page, then disable. And so then that's how we get things that are disabled here. And there's an onPress event for the touch wrapper saying when it's not disabled and you press on it, then it's going to call this SetPage of our component to an absolute position of 0, which means at the very beginning. So that's how that one works. And the rest of them are pretty much the same. Same thing, these buttons get enabled and disabled at the same time, the same with the next and last. So this disabled property is the same. But here we're doing a relative -1 to go back one page. And if we, here's the page number, show it if we have that property. Next is just checking to see if the current page equals the total pages. And if it's not disabled, then we're doing a relative set page to the next one. And same thing with the last one. So that's how that works. Now we need to talk really quickly about sequencers and normal page mode and and fast mode because this is a problem actually that I ran into with this. And I know this video is getting a little bit long, but bear with me here. The problem I was facing was that I didn't have a sequencer set. Now, if you don't have a sequencer set, then something else determines on if this event happens in normal mode or fast mode. So notice how I'm swiping this and I'm getting my speak item and it's working just fine and everything was great. But then when I click one of these buttons to go to a previous or next, or any of these actually, when I'm using the set page, I do that and there is no speak item that's happening. If I swipe, it worked just fine. If I did one of these controls that did the set page, it didn't work. The solution is to use a sequencer, but let's jump into that really quickly and talk about why. If we look at commands, it's talking about two modes, normal mode or fast mode. So in order for something to be in normal mode, one of these, these conditions have to be met. And in the case of a user swiping on the pager and the onPageChanged event happening, that makes it go in normal mode, which matches what we saw happening. But then what happens in fast mode? So what they have here is a couple different tables. Notice how we have these events here and what happens, what their behavior, when they are executed. Are they executed when it's fast mode or normal mode, or in some cases both? So those components that are have those actionable properties have these events. We'll have those. Every component has these base properties, like here's onMount is always in normal mode. And here this is pager onPageChanged. Sometimes it's in a normal mode and sometimes it's in fast mode. And we saw the case where the manual swipe was in normal mode, but what ends up happening is that for some reason that onPageChanged, when we're doing the set page, was in fast mode. Well, what happens when an event happens in fast mode? If you go down to this table, you can see that certain commands either are ignored or they go ahead and run when they're in fast mode. So for example, we had SpeakItem. Well, a SpeakItem is ignored when it's running in fast mode. The set page, let's see if we can find that. Set page is ignored when it's run in fast mode. So what happens is it must be running in fast mode. And the fix to something running in fast mode is that you can specify a sequencer, which then, just by giving it some name for the sequencer, in this case, then it makes this parallel happen in normal mode, and every child is in normal mode. So even though this page was firing, this onPageChanged was firing, it was in fast mode, and so now this is changing it into normal mode, so that now as we swipe, we get the speak item, and as we do a set page, we get it as well. So that's how that works. And even though it's a little bit confusing sometimes, just understand that fast mode is kind of there to protect the component from something firing too many times. In this case, we're saying, all right, things are okay. The thing that we're doing is a set page, and it's only by an on press of a touch wrapper, and that's normally in normal mode. But we're going to make sure that in this case, onPageChanged runs in normal mode as well. So that's how that all works. And in the end, we have a nice pager control for this comic. There's some things that we can do better. For example, if we change some of the different viewport sizes, this doesn't, the navbar doesn't look really great. So there's some things that we could do to improve that. So there is some improvement to it, but overall, this is a nice example of the pager control. So in this episode, we learned about the pager component, the onPageChanged event, and the setPage command. We also learned a little about fast mode and sequencers, and the SpeakItem command, and why we need to use object data sources. So in the next video, we'll look at the video component. I hope this video was helpful. Please let me know with a like or a share. Thank you for watching.